Smarties, today we welcome Emily Kircher-Morris and Amanda Morin on the podcast to discuss their new book, Diversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so All Students Feel Accepted and Supported. During our wide-ranging conversation with them, we discussed their collaboration, we discussed neurodiversity affirming schools and practices, and we discussed the difference between neurodiversity and neurodivergent. We also discussed how small changes can make a big impact structurally and systemically, and how behavior is communication and contextual, how you cannot punish skills into action, and that there is no such thing as normal. They also discuss the notion that challenges can be viewed as possibilities. We are so thrilled to welcome them. Please make sure to check out the links in our show notes that will link you to all the things. So their book, to Emily's podcast, to Amanda's work and previous books, and we can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 360 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we are really excited because we have two wonderful guests coming on the podcast with us. First, we have Emily Kircher-Morris and Amanda Morin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's going to be a lot of female voices on this podcast. So
yes,
let's take a moment. And Emily, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I'm Emily. I am the host of the Neurodiversity Podcast. I am a licensed professional counselor. So primarily I work with neurodivergent kids and teens and their families in the mental health setting. But I also used to be a teacher, and I taught both in the gen ed classroom as well as the gifted ed classroom. And so I work a lot with twice exceptional kids. And I also worked as a school counselor. And I'm the author of a couple of different books. My most recent one with my wonderful co-author, Amanda, who is here today. And that book is Neurodiversity Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices so All Students Feel Accepted and Supported.
And we're going to, of course, link all this in the show notes for our audience. Fantastic. And Amanda?
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Morin. I'm glad that Emily was the one who said the title of the book, because there's a whole story behind being able to say the title of the book.
I know you get that.
I'm a certified teacher. I am an early childhood specialist, and I work with families and students, neurodivergent students. I do a lot of executive function and emotional regulation support in neuroaffirming ways. So that's where I really focus. I'm also the author of a handful of books, and Emily noted the one that we co-authored together, which is the latest one. I've done a lot of work around empathy and special education, and so I'm also the parent of 3 neurodivergent children, and I'm also neurodivergent myself. So this is like my entire existence is full of neurodivergence, and I kind of enjoy it. Most days.
Most days, right? So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys, because I think now more than ever, and I really don't want to skew political, but I think now more than ever, these are important conversations that us leaders in the education space need to be having with one another and with each other. So before we kind of dive more into neurodiversity affirming schools, can you share a little bit about how this book came about and how your collaboration came to be? Steph and I always love hearing origin stories, particularly with women who are collaborators with one another, because we relate to that. So Can you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah. So Amanda and I originally met on Twitter, may it rest in peace. And
Yes.
We were both educational advocates and just kind of really connected because we have a lot of parallel things in our lives. Amanda mentioned in her introduction, she has 3 neurodivergent kids. I do 2. Our husbands as well are also very similar, which is interesting as well. But basically, we had both done a lot of work. We had written other books. And so I had invited Amanda to be a guest on the podcast, which is kind of our first interactions that we had. But it kind of built from there. And so I had the idea for this book specifically, but I didn't want to write another book by myself.
It's so isolating, right?
That's part of how we got started collaborating, is we were both writing books separate books during the pandemic. And we were sort of, I don't want to say accountability partners, because I don't think that was it as much as we were just like checking in with each other because it was isolating.
Were you guys writing at the same time and you knew the other person was writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's essential. It's just like another layer of accountability. When Steph and I were first starting out in our respective businesses, we used to sit on Zoom and we would each be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of us would pipe up and pull the other one out.
Yeah, we did it when we were getting board certified because we had to write
all
those things. And that was during the pandemic too. So totally, it's a game changer.
There's a whole conversation about body doubling there too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
And Amanda, I don't know that we've really talked about this publicly a whole lot, but the other thing that happened during that time, because the pandemic was so difficult and because it was so isolating and there were so many things that happened, I know for me, I just felt very disconnected from a lot of people. And one of the things that I did at one point in time, I was like saying, I'm like, I need to find somebody who...
Community.
Yes. Yeah. And so I remember actually, I reached out to Amanda and I said, hey, do you want to just hop on a Zoom sometime and just kind of talk about all of the things? And that was actually really hard for me to do that. I don't know, Amanda, if I've ever really shared that with you.
Yeah.
But I was really struggling. But I knew that we had kind of just had this connection, you know, just as far as kind of worldview and seeing things. And so pandemic was a weird time, but I think this was one of the things that kind of came out of it ultimately in the long run.
Yeah. And it's not just the book. And I think that's the important part. And Emily and I think just recently have started talking to each other about like, that was a tough thing for both of us to be sort of vulnerable enough to say, is this a person that I can actually talk to and tell that I'm struggling and, you know, have these conversations with? I'm really glad she reached out because it would just cemented a really good friendship, which, as the two of you know, that friendship when you're working together is really essential. It's really essential to have that other kind of trusting friendship, respect relationship, because there's always going to be these little things that come up when you're working together that you have to figure out how to address. And with Emily, I feel incredibly comfortable just saying like, I don't agree and here's why, or hearing her say to me, I don't agree and here's why, right? So that was huge to be able to have that foundation laid already.
Yeah. Once we had the idea for the book, though, I had reached out. I knew that Amanda would be a good collaborator because we both come at it from different angles. I come at it from that gifted twice exceptional side. She comes at it from that special education side. She has a lot of different experiences as far as in the educational community. I kind of came at it from this mental health side of things. So it gave us a broad view of what we wanted to do and what we wanted to address in this book. And so then we got it together and then we had a contract. So then we had no choice. Then we had to write it.
Then you had a deadline.
Yeah. How long did it take to write it?
That's an interesting question. I mean, how long did it take versus how long we had is a different conversation.
So I think we submitted our proposal in January of 2023.
Yeah.
And it was due in October.
Oh, it was originally due in August.
Oh, yeah. We're like, oh, no, we can't do that.
We did half and then we did another half.
We asked for it to be a little bit longer, I think at the beginning. I don't really remember. Anyway, we started writing it really heavily like in July.
It sounds about right. Can I ask a logistical question? So you're writing this book together. Did you guys map out what the book was going to be and then sort of assign chapters?
Yeah.
Yes. You know, and the joy of a book proposal is you have to have the outline, right? You have the outline to start with. Once we had the outline, we realized, oh, we need to switch things around a little bit. And we did a lot of collaboration on Zoom, on video, over chatting, sort of looking at it and saying, as we started breaking down into subheadings within those chapters, like there are some chapters where we each wrote part of the chapter. So we were really looking at, you know, where are my strengths? Where's Emily's strengths? What does she know that she could add more to than I could? And then we had to spend time, you know, kind of making sure the voice was the same. What was really cool is, you know, if Emily wrote something or I wrote something, almost always there was an angle that she added that I hadn't thought of, or vice versa. And that was really interesting. I think it made the book longer than we anticipated it being, but also much richer than we anticipated it being.
This is why I love the collaboration, because another thing that creating content does is it forces you to think what you think, to like figure out what you think about things. And so when you have somebody else that's writing, on a topic that you've mutually agreed and you're like, okay, Amanda's going to write this section, but then Emily's reading, like the idea that she can add to it and iterate on it and it's going to spark something else for you, Amanda. It's so much more, frankly, fun than the laborious process of doing it alone and isolated after feeling isolated.
Amanda and I, again, I think we've written 10 books between us. And we will both say, though, that this was the hardest book that we've written because it's so new. I feel like the other books that we've written were more building on what was really already established, but this idea of what it really takes to be neurodiversity affirming and what we need to change systemically in the schools to support kids who approach learning and relationships and all of these different things differently. There's not a lot out there, but there are things here and there, but it's not as established. And so it forces you to sit there and really think about, what do I think about this? It really did. It really forced us to be able to articulate exactly what it is that we know from our experiences, from the research, from the kids that we've worked with in order to facilitate this change.
It can take time to figure out what you think about something. And that's why, not to get into the weeds about ed therapy, but when we talk about learners who are writing, we don't want them to start with the thesis. They don't know how they feel about it yet. So it can take time. Sometimes you need that process to see, oh, this is the framework. This is the lens through which I'm looking at this. I think you gave like a perfect entryway into discussing neurodiversity affirming schools. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, what that means to you, how you're sort of navigating this?
Sure. And I think the interesting thing is we will probably both still describe it a little bit differently, which is wonderful, right? It gives this sort of diversity of thought around neurodiversity affirming. I think the first thing is we really chose the language carefully. We use the word neurodiversity affirming instead of neurodivergent affirming on purpose, because we really wanted to make sure we were talking about all of the minds, all of the types of minds that you find in schools, in classrooms, not just neurodivergent students. So the difference being, right, if you think about neurodiversity is everybody. There's diversity of thought. There's diversity of the way the mind works. There's diversity, and it's a lot like biodiversity, right? There's all kinds of environmental things in the world that come differently, thrive in different environments and things like that. So the entire population together is neurodiverse. There are people who are neurodivergent where the way that their brains process and put out information interacts with the world. And that's the important part, right? Interacts with the world and the systems and things like that in ways that make it a little bit more difficult for them to navigate. And a lot of that's based on sort of the systems around us and how they are affected by those systems. And as somebody who struggles with some of those things myself, but I think the difference is we wanted to make sure that we were explaining to people that neurodivergence is just divergent, right? It's a divergent way of being. But there are things that you can do to support neurodivergent learners that are just going to support all learners. And that was where really we're coming from, is the fact that you have learners in your classroom, in your schools, all of whom need some sort of support. They need strategies. They need, choices. They need all of these different ways to learn. And our goal was to say, like, these are students who are in your classroom, whether or not they're neurodivergent. And we want to make sure that the practices you use are best practices that are going to support all the learners in your school. Emily, what do you have to add to that?
I think the biggest hurdle is that teachers are so inundated with all of these ideas of things they have to do differently, of things they have to change, and they already have such full plates. And it's very overwhelming to think about this as it's just another thing I have to do. And what we really try to emphasize is that these are small changes. You can do one thing at a time. But to me, the biggest thing that I want teachers to understand is what it means to be neurodivergent and how little tweaks in our communication or how we interpret certain behaviors or how we discipline students, how if we just take a little bit of a different angle to look at that, it offers us an opportunity to meet kids where they are in a newer and better way to help them learn to be their authentic self and actually learn more in order to reach whatever their potential might be. I think, so Amanda mentioned, she's neurodivergent. We both grew up neurodivergent. I was diagnosed as ADHD when I was in 5th grade, which for women my age is very uncommon. Mm-hmm. But all I know is like the only thing that I ever had is like, okay, so I had a label. I had some medication, which I don't really remember how much that helped or didn't help. But the only strategies I had was that I was disciplined. I was given a 0, or I was made to stay in from recess, or I was whatever. But nobody actually stopped and taught me any skills or helped me understand why I was struggling with the things I was struggling with. And that's honestly is something that I am still unlearning, those messages that I internalized about myself based on those ableist ideas about what somebody should be able to do. Totally. That's, I think, a big driver with this as far as shifting how teachers view their students.
I love this because the things that we talk about on this podcast, the skills, the strategies, the learning opportunities, it's best practices for everybody. It's not just best practices for learners who have ADHD or who are neurodiverse. We are learning so much as a field. This is a conversation Steph and I have a lot, is how do we offer without overwhelming? I would love to get some small specifics of examples of what you were talking about these small changes that can be easy for a teacher to think about, that can have a pretty global impact in the classroom and their larger community. Can you share some of those examples?
There are a couple that come up a lot, but the first, Emily mentioned behavior, and I think that's a big one, right? A mindset shift around how do we look at behavior, because in the history of education, behavior has been something that you have to keep under control.
You have to manage it.
It has to be managed, right?
Right. And I've been a teacher in a classroom, and I know what the pressure is to feel like you've got everything under control and you have everybody meeting the rules. And what we do often is we put these expectations in place and maybe don't have the whys behind them or understand why some students may not be able to meet those expectations, or even the scaffolding they need to be able to get there, or whether or not it's an expectation they should be meeting, right? And so one of the things that we talk a lot about in the book, and when we talk, right, I think is probably, is the idea that you often hear people say behavior is communication. True. But behavior isn't just communication, it's contextual as well. And so one of the things that we really hope that teachers and administrators will do is start thinking about the context in which those quote unquote behaviors are occurring, right? What is going on underneath the surface? What might be affecting that student? What do they need skill-wise to learn how to manage? Or is it an expectation they don't need to meet? Like we talk a lot about eye contact, right? And eye contact is the thing that comes up all the time when we're talking, I think because autism and autistic students are the ones that pop into people's heads, but it's not just autistic students who struggle with eye contact. But we think about the fact that we're asking kids to make eye contact. Well, do they need to, or do we want them to, right? Is it comfortable for them, or is it more comfortable for us? Do we feel like we're being paid attention to better if they're looking us in the eye? So like just small things like that. What's the context? What's happening? So it's a matter of like taking that pause and thinking through what's happening in this environment for this particular student that I might need to address differently instead of, disciplining it. One of the things that I will say over and over and over again is you can't punish skills into action. That doesn't happen, right?
Say that again for the people in the back.
You cannot punish skills into being. You just can't.
Another small thing that is really important is for educators or parents or whoever. Amanda kind of alluded to this, talking about the contextualization. And to me, what that means is asking why. Why is something happening? So the tricky thing about the characteristics of neurodivergence is that societally, we label these things as character flaws or moral failings.
Mm-hmm.
If you struggle with executive functioning, if you struggle with social communication, if you struggle with managing your emotions, that means that you are lazy or unmotivated or rude or too sensitive or whatever it might be.
The interpretation of it.
Yes. And when you stop to ask what's actually happening here, you can actually work to find the solution to what's happening. And so if I see a student who is struggling with task initiation, getting started on something, I can walk over to them and interpret it as, well, they just don't want to do it. They're being lazy, or, they just don't care about their grade, or whatever it might be. Or I can say, what's the barrier here? Is it that they're struggling with planning and prioritizing their thoughts? Is it that the concept that I'm asking them to do is ambiguous and they need something that's a little bit more black and white, so I need to break it down and scaffold it a little bit differently? Is it that they just have slower processing speed and they need more time before they get started? Those are problems that I can find solutions for. I can't find a solution for, well, they're just lazy and don't want to do the work. And I feel like our job as educators is to seek out those solutions. I feel like teachers do that in many, many ways, but I think that this is a different area where we really are moving away from how we used to interpret those behaviors as just problematic willpower things, and moving it to, there's probably something else going on. And if we offer some supports or some strategies, not only do we help in this particular instance, but we help in the long term.
For sure. I wanted to add, I think one of the things that comes up a lot when I'm talking with parents is, but they did it with this. Why can't they do it with that?
I have that conversation with parents a lot too.
Right. And so understanding that there's not a one size fits all, and getting curious about that as well. The difference of what it is. Is it time of day? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Is it a different subject? Is it a different teacher? There's just so many.
Are they just having a tough day, right?
Extra questions that you need to ask around that. We don't realize that there is that extra level of questioning.
Yeah.
That there isn't that one size fits all situation.
And that's something we address too. The second thing that I think is a small change that makes big shifts is the idea of not looking at things as one size fits all, right? Not everybody's going to provide the information in the same way. Not everybody's going to process information in the same way. Not everybody's going to learn at the same pace, right? So thinking really carefully about how do you provide different options to access the same material is something we talk a lot about. We talk about universal design for learning, but we also talk about what would it look like if you made accommodations available for students to use whenever they needed to, not just students with IEPs or not just students with 504 plans, but just students. What happens when you say, it's okay if you use speech to text? It's okay. I'm sitting here with my own fidget. It's okay if you fidget so you can have like a focused conversation. What happens when you think outside the typicals, and I put quotations around that, the typicals, and start adding in ways for students to start thinking about what's going to work best for them? Because in the end, as teachers, we want to impart information, but we also want to teach students how to be learners, right? Like that's the thing, is they need to learn how to learn. And so how do we provide them with the tools that help them figure out how they're going to learn best is a big thing too.
That was an alternate name for this podcast. In case anybody was wondering how we came up with Learn Smarter, an alternate name was Learning How to Learn. As you were just talking, I was just thinking about, I was very fortunate to have wonderful, wonderful public school teachers. Felt like I had a private school experience in the public school setting in LAUSD. So the rest of the country, it's not all terrible in LAUSD. But one of the things that I used to love was when they would give us the option of how to demonstrate our knowledge. Some people would do a play.
Yes.
I would always write an essay because for me, that was faster. And there's so many more options now as technology has expanded to demonstrate what you know and how you know it. And so just simple things like that can really be something that can globally make an impact in the classroom. It's been 20 years since I graduated from high school. I still remember that. So, okay, go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, right, I love that you have a positive experience that you remember, right? Because I think we have neurodivergent students, myself included, and I graduated high school a lot longer ago than 20 years. But I remember some negative experiences from when I was in school, right? And so we want to make sure that our neurodivergent students, our neurodiverse, all of our students are having those kinds of I remember this positive experience, right? And so some of what we are hoping to do is to shift that. So we have more students saying, I remember when I got to do a play instead of writing an essay, right? Mm-hmm. Because we don't want people to carry those negative experiences forward with them. I have those voices in my head still when I am trying to do a task that is hard for me. I have that inner critic. And it comes from my experiences.
You hear the old teachers.
I do.
And the old messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want people not to have to hear that messaging in their heads.
Yeah.
So my question is, who is this book primarily targeted for?
I think the broad term is educators, right? And so that's classroom teachers, it is administrators, it is counselors, it is speech language pathologists and OTs who are in the schools. It is really anyone who has a voice in schools. So I know that we've had parents who've used it already, as they are advocating for their child. We have an entire chapter on strength-based IEPs. If you're advocating for accommodation plans, it can be a tool there as well. But ultimately, our goal is to help facilitate systemic change to create learning environments that support all learners, not just the kids who are part of the middle of that bell curve, which is what we've done for a long time.
So what I'm really hearing is y'all are pushing forward a movement. I love a movement. I love a walk. I love getting involved. So what is our first step if we feel passionately about this and we want to join your movement? And obviously our audience should be reading the book, and we'll link that up in the show notes. And I know this episode is going to resonate with our audience for sure, because
for sure
the people you're talking to are listening to this podcast. So, but what's our first step?
Oh, wow. That's a big question.
I don't know if this is the first step, but here's a step.
Give me a step.
I like it.
We would love it if people want to go buy the book. Love that. Do that. On board. But also, if you don't, you're listening to this, you like podcasts. So
just going to say the same thing.
Yeah. So Amanda and I released a limited series podcast called Creating Neurodiversity Affirming Schools that is kind of a parallel to the book. You don't need the book to listen to it and get a lot out of it, but basically we did one episode per chapter of the book. And so that would be something that if you just would like more about this topic, that is a place where we really talk about some actionable strategies and digging into the topics that we cover in the book. So that would be a step. Amanda, I'll let you come up with the first step.
Well, you took my step.
Have you guys done this book in an audiobook yet?
That was my next question.
We've talked to the publisher about that, in part because we want to make sure that there are multiple modalities available.
Of course.
Yes, please.
I think another step is just believing that neurodivergence exists. And I mean that very sincerely, right? I think there are oftentimes internal experiences that we see as outward behaviors. And because we can't understand what that internal experience is for the student in front of us or the child in front of us, if you're a parent, it's hard to believe that whatever's happening is real. It's hard to believe that it's hard for them, right? Stuff you said, parents who say, how come they can do this, but they can't do this, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we have to start entirely understanding all of the neurology of it, right? Or the neuroscience of it. But I think that step of believing that there is something that needs to be addressed is huge.
The acceptance of it.
Yeah.
It's the acceptance, but also I just did a talk last week and I was talking about this idea of when you are seeing things, when you are feeling as a parent and you are feeling that frustration and, to steal from Elaine and Diane, you're shitting all over yourself.
Yeah.
That is a signal to us as a parent to get curious. And it was a very interesting conversation to have with these parents because they thought that I meant ask your kid.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't know either. It was an invitation for them to look at something differently and then collaboratively explore the underlying things, the foundational things that may not be there, or what they don't understand too. Because when you tell a kid, go clean your room, they don't know what that means. And that's where we're inviting parents and teachers to get curious, because it's very rarely they're just trying to piss us off.
Yeah.
Very rarely that. Something is hard.
And I think the other part too, like in addition to being curious, having those conversations out loud in front of your child.
Yes.
Not necessarily the why are you trying to peeve me or whatever, right? Like, but the conversation about like what's happening.
Yes.
Having those conversations with students, having those conversations with children so that they're part of the conversation from the beginning, right? I'm a big believer that we shouldn't be talking about kids and not with kids, right? They need to understand their own brains and how their brains are working so that they are not internalizing these messages that they feel lazy. They feel like maybe they're not motivated, that they feel like they're dumb or any of those kinds of things that kids tell themselves.
Can you guys be my mom? I had a great mom. How amazing to be raised from that perspective.
We talk well. I don't know if we do it as well.
Yeah.
Our best intentions is there.
It's a learning process. I will build on that, though, specifically because one of the other steps that I was thinking about that is one of the primary things that we need to do is what I like to call talking about opening the door for self-advocacy. We talk a lot. Kids need to self-advocate. They need to just ask for help. They need to know what they need and they need to say it. And I always challenge people, think about the last time you had to self-advocate for something. It's scary and it's hard and it's overwhelming and we're adults. And so to ask a kid, but especially a neurodivergent kid, to like be able to go up to their teacher, to be able to go to a counselor, to be able to go to whoever it is and say, I'm having a hard time with this. Can you help me? That's a big ask. And so when we are able to, I think about it like putting out a ramp instead of stairs, we need to open that door, invite that self-advocacy, build that rapport, honor that self-advocacy when they do ask for something.
Model it.
Yes, absolutely.
Model it in our own lives so they can see how you can politely say, my coffee order isn't right, or you can model those little moments. You don't just have to accept.
Right.
I was just thinking, just to interject in there quickly, about how hard it is for so many kids to even order what they want at a restaurant.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they know what they want.
Well, sometimes.
Right.
But...
And they can't, for the most part, right? They know to a degree what they're going to want and they can't even say it. So now you're asking a kid who doesn't really know to then say it. Like that's just an extra level of understanding that they're not there yet to be able to do. And it also goes back to just like how we think about what we think for this podcast, that is modeling that. What do you think about your learning journey? You as a learner, what works and what doesn't is part of that learning process as well, for sure. So anyway, I just wanted to interject because I thought, it's so hard to order even.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is something else that we talk about when we do our speaking engagements is like that sort of practicing of having your kids order or having your kids make the dentist appointment or, we need to call this restaurant because they're not on DoorDash. You call and place the order.
Oh, well, I'm not ordering from that place, but
1,000%. They'd be like, we'll just pick something else.
But it's okay to do that too, right? So it's interesting. One of the other books I wrote is on adulting. It's called Adulting Made Easy, right? And it talks a lot about that. But my kids also know if we're going to have to go through a drive-through, I will pull over in the parking lot and make my husband start driving through the drive-through because I have such anxiety about doing the drive-through. It's okay for them to see there are things that I'm not going to be able to do. Emily's laughing a little bit at me. I can see it.
I was keeping it quiet.
Yeah, but I could see it.
You found a collaborative way. It's not comfortable for you. You don't want to be the one to do it. And so you guys worked it out. It doesn't have to be this big dramatic moment.
It doesn't. And so I think like for my kids to see there are things that I'm not going to do because they're not comfortable and there's another way to make that work is super important too.
So Amanda, can you get Dave to let me drive through the drive-thrus because he just gets really irritable about it.
I'll have a conversation with him. I'm also thinking about the fact that, Emily and I have done a couple of conferences together lately where we've spoken. And if it's not on DoorDash, Emily's the one who will call and make the reservation at the restaurant. And I love that. For me.
Yes.
For me.
It's good for you. It's also about just understanding where you are and that you can get your needs met. You can still get the reservation. You can still get your food at the drive-thru. Just have to communicate.
Absolutely. That's a self-advocacy piece.
Totally. But you and your partner know there's probably not a lot of conversation about it. It's probably just you pull over, you switch because you've done it before.
Yeah.
What I love about this is that we are all openly admitting the drive-through is a big part of our lives. And I appreciate that about this group. I'm not going to ask you for your thesis statement, but
she's going to ask you for your thesis statement.
But I'm going to ask you for the thesis statement. The four of us could talk forever because our language is so similar and our ideology and the way we think about things is so similar. But what's the one nugget?
What's the takeaway?
What's the one nugget that you want our audience to have after this episode?
I think the big picture is that there is no such thing as normal.
Oh, I love that.
And that's okay. And that we can meet people where they are in our regular lives, in our professional lives. And not only does it help those people who we're interacting with, but it helps us too. When we let down some of those expectations and just come into it with an open mind and a perspective that we're going to solve problems, whatever that might be.
And I think I would just add on to that I love the idea of starting to look at things that are challenging in our classrooms as possibilities and not problems. What are the possibilities within that challenge and not what are the problems we have to solve?
The title of your next book?
Well, oof, I don't know, man.
I think Amanda and I were still recovering from.
Fair enough.
Steph and I have talked for years about doing a book and we just can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
It's just not the time yet.
It is a lot.
It's wonderful. I love it. I do. When I get to sit down, and you mentioned liking to write an essay when you were a kid, I was kind of the same way. I love writing.
Yeah.
And I actually really love the process. Like I'll be in the middle of preparing a presentation for a speaking event and I'm like digging into the research. Again, that thinking about what I'm going to say and what my perspective is on it.
Mm-hmm.
How do I feel?
Yes, I love that. But also to do it with a deadline and to do it and to undertake it, it's like, I don't know, but my ADHD brain, the minute I have 5 extra minutes, I've got to fill that. So I'm sure that there'll be something on the horizon and Amanda's coming along with it, whether she wants to or not. So,
oh my God, it's like I'm looking at me and Steph. I'm like, Steph doesn't have a choice.
I'm here for it. I may slow it down a little bit and be like, wait a minute.
it's probably for the best.
But it's funny, I wrote my first book and I was like, never writing another book. I wrote my second book and I'm like, I'm never writing another book. Here I am 6 books later. And my husband keeps saying like, your bibliological clock is still ticking. And I'm like, oh.
Bibliological.
That's so
You can
funny.
see the ideas. I mean, I will tell you, I love writing when I'm in flow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, I can only be in flow with writing between like 11 o'clock at night and like 3 a.m. So like,
Oh, so ours is opposite. Okay, so we're good like between about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. But beyond that, but yeah, there's like a 4-hour window that.
that's so funny. To be fair, I wrote my whole college thesis, which was not on education. It was on assisted reproductive technologies, like between 10 p.m. to like 4 a.m. I'm several years out of college. It might be different now, but I actually don't think it would be different. I think I would be better overnight.
You work within what you needed.
You did your graduate one just like that too. What are you talking about?
Did I write it in the middle of the night also?
Yeah, like the night before.
That doesn't sound right that I wrote it the night before.
Let's just say I chose colleges and graduate schools where I didn't have to write anything or take the entrance exam. So there's how we're different.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
I mean, we have spent many a weekend working. So, you fit it in when you can.
That's, I think, the thing. I don't know that I can do it, be another weekend warrior author. It's a lot to have to do that on top of everything else.
Yeah,
For sure.
But give me a year. I don't know.
Yeah.
let's rejuvenate.
Yes.
You guys ever do like writing retreats and go away to do it?
So here's a story. This is a story. Emily and I have been friends for, oh my goodness.
Well, since before the pandemic, let's just say.
Right.
We never met in person until after we had signed the contract on this book and decided we had to sit down and actually get working on it. So Emily and I don't even live in the same state. We don't even live in the same time zone. Okay. We got an Airbnb, had never met each other, got Airbnb,
Yep.
and said, we're going to sit in this Airbnb for 3 days and write this book. And it worked.
You're going to write the whole book in 3 days or just get started? Did you do any writing the 3 days you were there?
Yes.
We did actually quite a bit of it.
It was just funny that we had never met in person and we'd only ever talked on Zoom or via text. And we're like, oh, this seems reasonable.
Not at all a possibility of something going badly.
It was great.
It was good.
The intimacy that can be developed through an authentic connection, whether or not you're in the same place or not,
For sure.
which is why our work is so effective virtually. It's a true relationship. Which state did you go to?
We picked a state that was neither of our states.
Good for you.
So yes, we have done writing retreats.
I think one of our criteria was we looked at which airports were hubs for various airlines that we could get there without a connecting flight.
There you go.
We do a lot of work together when we're in separate airports, actually, to be really honest, because we both travel a lot for the work we do. And there's some time to have conversations while you're in an airport.
Or on an airplane if you have Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it all went well. It was great. We learned a lot about each other over that weekend in Boston.
You guys, thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is so fun.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
This was really wonderful. Can you say our signature sign off, which is have a great week, Smarties?
Have a great week, Smarties. It's a wrap.